Chips by Matthew Wardell. Uncle Matthias had a chip slot installed in himself by choice when he was in his early 20s, before Bree was born, before having a chip slot became fashionable, and long before it was socially mandatory as having a cell phone once was. Bree had caught glimpses of the older slot model, usually tucked away under a high collar, hiding like how Uncle Matthias was tucked away from the world. "Damn thing still itches," was all he ever said about chip slots, before abandoning the subject in favor of complaining about something else. His aching back, his tiny capsule apartment, all of these things were related and perpetuating, like snakes biting each other's tails. Bree was sitting in that capsule apartment now, everything white like a hospital. She sat on the edge of the hospital white bed, which was the hospital white room's only piece of furniture, lined by a few slot-like shelves. The whole place was automatically vacuum dusted around the litterings of Uncle Matthias's knickknacks and relics. Thank God the room was self-cleaning, or else Bree wouldn't dare sit on the bed, opposite her uncle who was more often than not uncleaned. You couldn't stand upright in the capsule apartment, so sitting was all they did. Because chip slots were the only thing they shared in common, they hardly talked, but Bree knew, with gut-churning guilt, that her visits meant the world to Uncle Matthias. Today, Bree's chip slot was showing. It was a hot summer, and hiding the nape of one's neck usually marked you for suspicion, at least in her dorm. "Mom's doing good," Bree said, unprompted. That's good." Uncle Matthias was investing his attention in the McDonald's burger and fries she'd brought him. Another one of Uncle Matthias's taboos was Mom, and his interest in Bree's other older siblings sometimes waxed, often waned. But McDonald's never changes. Bree noticed the crumpled McDouble wrapper from her last visit, resting on the shelf where it had not been yet identified as garbage to be taken. "Hey, can't you—" she paused. "I mean, why don't you go to McDonald's any other days?" "What, and get fat?" Uncle Matthias laughed, but said no more on the subject. He sometimes pulled at his metal collar, locked around from the nape of his neck ever since he'd been put on watch a year and change ago, which rekindled his burnt-out relationship with Bree. Their conversations, as always, were brief and nebulous, and then Bree went back to her dorm. Like Bree, most girls in the dorm had had chip slots reinstalled by school sanction while they were around 10, 11, sometimes as early as 9 years old, before their body and emotions developed too drastically. Boys typically had a year or so extra time with their bare necks, unless you were caught with ADHD at a young age, but Bree hadn't known enough boys to broach the topic. Surprisingly, considering their usual boastfulness, boys were the quickest to hide their slots beneath hoods or popped collar shirts. It was stupid considering everyone had them these days, but then again, everyone hid them. Or rather, it was the colors of the chips, and sometimes the lack thereof, that were hidden. Gwen was like the self-appointed leader of Bree's dorm, a real busybody who often reprimanded Bree for things she didn't do and before had thought that she didn't have to do. "Hang the laundry like this so it's not rumpled. Don't slouch like that. This color brings out your chip slot. Own up to those colors, girl." Gwen had been one of the first among their peers to have the slot installed, and the first to popularize the idea, make it fashionable. Chips as a trend had already invaded the public zeitgeist via movies and web TV, though the topic was usually steered clear of in children's programming. It was too tough to explain to young minds, and schools didn't teach it until around 8, when it was taught almost parallel with the various birds and bees. There was, then, a pressure for parents to beat schools to the punch, but Bree's mother had only talked about chip slots in a tertiary way, even though she and Uncle Matthias had them installed. "They say I've got onsets from minor bipolar disorder," 9-year-old Gwen had bragged long ago, brushing aside her long auburn hair to show off the matte green chip in her polished chrome slot. The chip was the light color of fresh limes. Bipolar. 8-year-old Bree had seen polar bears in history simulations. The image of a baby cub, starving to death and clinging to its mother as she swam through an iceless sea, had imprinted itself on little Bree's memory. Bipolar. Looking back now, probably none of Bree's dorm sisters had got Gwen's meaning, though everyone had nodded knowingly and dismissed each other's questions with sly winks and affected, "Wouldn't you like to knows?" Gwen would collect other colors over time, though she'd never achieve the illustrious full rainbow, despite precursory self-diagnoses. Alas, her cocky nature made a hard case for the violet chip for general social anxiety disorder, otherwise common enough. With the parents signing off and a few lies about symptoms, it was easy enough to fool a dispensary, but in order to get the good chips here, the girls had to go through their dorm's nurse office, and Gwen's showboating was infamous in those halls. To this day, she carried her nearly completed collection around in a hard plastic case in her purse, always at hand. "Do you want to see my new swimsuit?" Gwen asked Bree. New swimsuit? Not the cross-strap one?" Bree asked. "New to the power of 3, for this weekend." Bree made a face. "You do remember we're going to the beach this weekend, right? And Davy will be there." She gave the last part in a stage whisper, though nobody passing in the halls gave them too much notice. Apparently, everyone was getting ready preemptively for the beach tomorrow. "Yeah," Bree said. "Didn't forget, just didn't get a new swimsuit." Gwen turned a little grave. "It's a money thing?" "Not a money thing, but—" "Well, if it was a money thing," she winked, "you can borrow something from my closet. Hell, take something. It won't look new on moi, but it might look new on you, Violet." Bree's neck had stopped growing hot at the mention of Violet after a couple years of use, but the nickname still drew discomfort. She'd hardly even wore the chip these days. The chemicals had effectively done their job, rebalanced her. Today she'd even left the chip in her room, unthinkingly, though Gwen likely didn't know all that. The violet chip was probably why they were friends anyway. Gwen's way of vicariously completing her rainbow collection. But again, violet was not an uncommon color. In fact, Bree saw it often in the slots of passing girls wearing open-necked dresses. So surely Gwen kept Bree around because she liked her, right? "Violet, come on," Gwen said again. Violet was the only color Bree had ever owned and ever tried. She sometimes felt that she should try other colors out, even just for a little while, though she wasn't sure if this was based on some actual need for further chemical rebalancing, or for kicks. She looked at herself wearing Gwen's turquoise two-piece in the mirror, and she didn't mind how she looked. The fit was nice. The flashy color drew attention, but not too much attention. She braced herself for Gwen's backhanded compliments, but all that came was, "I knew it. You're so pretty." And there wasn't anything sinister in the glares Bree caught her making. But then, back turned, Gwen said, "You'll wear your chip, won't you?" Bree rubbed her neck where the unpolished slot was. "Actually," she started slowly, "I haven't been wearing it lately." "Hmm? Oh, I hadn't noticed. Wow." "Yeah, I just don't want to overcompensate or, like, overshoot, you know?" "Gotcha." Gwen did this sly half smile and nodded like something was jumping up and down on her shoulders. "So, like, you are cured?" "Hey, you know it doesn't work like that." "No, yeah, of course." Nodding. "Just, what if there's an incident at the beach?" Gwen seemed to be pulling towards something, and then making a tactical retreat from any overt request. It could happen, but," Bree said, "I sometimes don't want to need it. The chip." Gwen scrunched up her face, welling up the non-existent drama in the changing closet. "I guess I still need it. Or, I just want to be a basket case." "Aha, you set off my trap." Bree only entertained the line with a monosyllabic grunt, opting to back out of the conversation. She didn't even want to say thank you for the swimsuit then, for fear that Gwen would suddenly change her mind about giving it to her. It was something she would do. Maybe it's the melting pot of chems in her brain. Something nasty in Bree's head thought, though she would never think it outright herself, much less say it. Bree lay in her bunk after lights out, swiping in and out of social media apps, mostly scanning fashion bloggers who alternated between Hollywood-level beauty and makeup and morning-faced, sweatpants-laden shots of reality. The trend of honest posts with long, soul-bearing captions on relative fame, the unveiling of chip colors, it was no longer surprising anyone or changing anyone's perception of brain chems. Hashtag chipped, not broken, had continued unbroken for years now. The idea of being damaged, of rising up and overcoming natural disadvantages, was attractive. Cool. Everyone thought themselves the underdog because everyone roots for the underdog. Whoa. Bree stopped the line of thinking before it spiraled anywhere too cavernous. Rolling over, she felt in the dark for her glasses case. Inside, beneath the folded up pair of tortoise shells, lay a small chip, maybe a square inch in size. She held it over her face and couldn't see the color of it in the dark. Her other hand explored the back of her neck, the little empty slot the world had put inside of her, the space which she was told needed to be filled at all times. When dawn broke, realization that she'd lost the chip floated in. She found the glasses case tangled in the sheets, but even overturning her bed and folding, unfolding, and refolding everything, the violet chip was gone. She must have overturned everything in the room that could be overturned. Someone must have taken the chip. Bree's room, like all the girls' bedrooms, was sectioned off individually, connected by a central kitchen and living space, each room with doors that couldn't lock. The thought of someone coming into her room at night, of hovering over her sleeping face and snatching her chip. Would Gwen stoop so low? Maybe the swimsuit had given her a what's yours is mine mentality. But imagine the drama that Gwen would milk if Bree announced the theft, much less made any accusations. Announcing the theft was akin to accusing Gwen, the only girl in the world petty enough to crush and dispose of the chip before admitting she was in the wrong. You sound like a paranoid yellow chipper, Bree told herself. So her game plan was to try and enjoy the beach day, keep an eye on Gwen's behavior, and continue her search in the evening. They were 2 of the 8 girls who took the train out to the beach that day. Not long ago, maybe in Uncle Matthias's youth, the coastal area had been clogged with industry. But in the years since, an artificial, man-made, though really machine-made, island was installed as a sort of oasis from the city. The island was bridged out far from the coast, so the water surrounding it was clean enough, and it included all the modern conveniences one needed. It could be crowded perpetually on weekends and holidays, sure, but for students who could easily go in the off days, it was a man-made paradise. A group of 6 or 7 boys met them at the train station, just outside of the ticket gates. They looked older. Not by too much, but definitely older. How do you know these guys again? Bree asked Gwen. Hannah, a very chic girl from their floor who kept mostly to herself, had known the boys before. How she'd met these boys from an all-boys school was something of a mystery, but so was Hannah a lot of the time. In short, Hannah had known Davy, for whatever reason, and through Hannah, Gwen had known Davy too, and now they were broadening their social circles, as Gwen assured them. They are cute, right? Gwen commented before the boys were in earshot, and Bree had to agree. So that's 2 for Gwen. Another girl, Sasha, mimicked Gwen's spiking intonation. Bree noticed both Gwen and Sasha were wearing chips, orange and red. So were the other girls, except for Hannah and Bree. And besides some instinctual neck touches, not unlike hair playing or skirt adjustments, the girls didn't take their chips out. They were still giggling about Sasha's comment when they approached the boys. Just don't overthink it, Bree told herself. Besides a couple of athletic types, the boys seemed very artsy. A few were smoking real cigarettes. One had a French-style beret, as well as the confidence to pull it off, if you can believe it. Oi! Hannah greeted them. You go for a swim yet? A smoking boy with glasses said, Nah, but we checked out the beach. Julian's saving a spot. Hannah and the boys laughed because that was so like Julian to do, and Gwen let out a little chuckle beside Bree, though Bree doubted Gwen knew who Julian was. As if reading Bree's mind, Gwen stepped forward as a way of reasserting her leadership and introduced herself to the new boys. There was a quick round of introductions, though it was impossible to remember everyone's name, so Bree just clung to the glasses boys, which turned out to be Davy. Davy, something of a leader of his own group, suggested they all go. As they walked, concrete gave way to sandy turf, so the girls took off their shoes and sandals. The boys' bare feet were caked in dark sand, clearly having waded into the water. "How's it at an all-girls school?" Bree jumped a bit when the boy with the beret asked her the question. What was his name again? She naturally twisted her neck to face him, to face her empty chip slot away from him. "Must be weird, yeah?" he pressed. "Yeah, the school mothers can be so strict," Bree added. "So naggy." "Ha, I'll bet." The boy squinted and scanned the beach as they crested over a little hill. The day was nearly cloudless, and little seagulls glided headlong into the wind. There had to be a few hundred people in sight, but the beach continued on down the way and curved into a sort of bay, peppered with shops for beachgoers and cottages for the rich and stressed. So far off, all the people seemed like one blur. Bree had left her glasses at the dorm too. She noticed while behind the beret boy that he was wearing a ruby red chip for chronic depression, maybe a history in his family. Mommy issues, maybe, though Bree hated when she started psychoanalyzing strangers with next to no info on them. Maybe she should get to know him. "Well, see ya, Bree." Beret boy drifted back deeper into the herd of boys, and Bree felt sorry she hadn't remembered his name. Davy's group had boarded off a section of beach with a fence of towels, guarded by the loyal Julian. He looked not unlike the other boys, lankier maybe, so Bree didn't see why he was the butt of the unspoken joke. The girls and boys entered the ceremonious ritual of undressing and revealing their swimsuits, Gwen with her new yellow suit, and Bree with the turquoise one given to her by Gwen. Bree thought maybe she was the only one scoping out chip slots. About half of the boys were empty. A couple had yellow, one blue. She found it easier to recognize them by color coordination, though she'd never call it to their faces like Gwen did with her. Violet. Thank God she'd been introduced as Bree earlier. They did the usual game of racing to the water, the boys having already swum earlier, now diving in and teasing, splashing, and eventually pulling in the reluctant girls who acted like the water was frigid. The water wasn't at all cold, really, seeing as the man-made beaches were temperature controlled. But why spoil the fun? Just have fun. Even Hannah was laughing. Gwen got on top of Beret Boy's shoulders during a chicken fight, and Bree was hit by a twinge of envy. Envy? It began to give way to a minor wash of anxiety, though Bree wasn't one to show physical symptoms easily. Still, she wished she had the violet chip. She watched Gwen at play, and thought about rummaging through the girl's bag when she wasn't looking, but it seemed unlikely with so many around. If her anxiety continued, maybe Bree could ask a dorm sister to borrow a chip. Jean had a violet in her handbag, she knew. Before she'd worked up the courage to pull Jean aside, Bree had convinced herself that she could do without the chip. Besides, things were going well. Some of the girls and boys still splashed about in the shallow waters. Some tossed back and forth a frisbee one of the boys had brought. Bree wound up at the patch of towels and bags and shoes, where a few boys and a few of her dorm sisters were sitting in deep conversation, led by a serious-faced Gwen. Despite their occasional spats, Bree could always have a place around Gwen. Bree stretched out on a towel nearby, and a boy thoughtfully slid over to expand the circle for her. Gwen was saying, "But, real talk? They've been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I don't even know who I'd be without them." She laughed, but only drew short laughs from people eager to cut in with their own anecdotes about chips. "Well, as for me," Davy with glasses said, "Yellow and me have been inseparable. Helped me through some grim times when my dad was drinking most." He fingered the yellow chip in his neck, as if to double-check it was still inserted. "Your dad's not so bad," another boy pushed him. Davy gave a face. "Actually," Gwen drew the talk back to her, "I've had to rely on almost every color over the years." She was the queen of the humble brag, Bree thought. Gwen could skirt the envy and sympathy of others with ease. Even when one could see through her tricks, one was drawn in. "Almost? What are missing?" the second boy asked. Gwen sighed. "Violet. I thought I needed it, but I've been able to get by." "Violet's not so rare," Davy remarked, as if comforting her. He lit a cigarette. If the symptoms show, it's not so tough to get. For a girl. His eyes flitted to Bree for a moment, and her heart palpitated as she wondered if they'd been talking about her. But Davy's eyes just as quickly darted away. The conversation stayed on chips, consistently rubber banding back to Gwen's all-encompassing knowledge of the subject. The urge for the violet chip, the brief head rush, the cool relaxation afterwards, hit Bree. Who was she to pretend she didn't need it? That made her sound like Gwen. There was nothing wrong with needing. No, with wanting it. She had a personality outside of chips, and would still have the personality with chips, right? When a group of the girls, including Jean and Sasha, went for a drink at a nearby beach hut, Bree tagged along. She noticed Jean was now wearing her violet chip, so asking for it would be impossible. Defeated, Bree drifted back towards the towels, but Gwen and the boys were gone. Where'd they go? She asked the volleyball players and swimmers lounging there for now. Beret Boy was among them, though now he was beretless. Bree didn't pick him out until she saw the red chip. They ran off to some caves for something. A dorm sister gestured along the coast, and her voice hinted at something more. Hannah went too, she added. The sun was starting to dip, a softer shade of orange setting in over the sky. Bree walked past the merrymaking groups of beachgoers, away from the noise and to the end of the beach until there was just the sound of the waves and her own footsteps splashing in the high tide. She had to wade up to her knees or else leap from mossy rock to rock around an outcropping of the island. And then she heard laughter. Hannah's, mostly, and some boys. There was a cave, though it was so well rounded and perfectly sized to betray its man-made nature. She wondered why it had been engineered there, an empty hole to be filled by what? Sure enough, Davy, 2 boys, and Hannah were there, laughing and smoking away. There was something else, too. A strange creature lied between them. It was Gwen, slumped forward on the cave floor. She was still in her new yellow bikini, so she looked shameful, almost lewd. The group was laughing at her. Hey, Bree said with caution. Is Gwen all right? Hannah laughed and shook her head as she exhaled a wispy trail of smoke. Gwen was facing away from the cave entrance from Bree, so she saw that something was jammed in Gwen's chip slot. Something dark and colorless. What's going on? Bree shot at Davy, who she hoped could still be a leader among them. Just going through some beginner's nerves, he chuckled. Remember how bad you were the first time, eh, Hannah? Gwen? Bree called out, her voice tremulous. She pulled Gwen back so she slumped the opposite way, now leaning into Bree's shoulder. Under the curtain of auburn hair, Gwen's eyes were open, swimming, and her mouth was trying to form words. Bree cradled her drooping head and touched the chip slot and the bootleg chip inside. Can I take it out? Hannah mumbled. It's just a bad trip. Is it safe to take it out? Bree shouted. Yeah, Davy said, taken aback. Only the other 2 boys continued laughing. Bree pushed on the chip and it slid back out easily. It was the size and shape of a normal chip, though of cheaper make, and without the flashy colors the real thing had become known for. A soft upper, Hannah sensed the question, with some minor hallucinogens. Should wear off fast. Hannah, you know Gwen can't handle this kind of stuff. What are you freaking out for? Not everyone is like your uncle. Bree's hand came up and struck Hannah across the face with a clap that echoed into the cave. This drew oohs from the 2 laughing boys she didn't know. You, Bree said, pointing at all 3 boys. Do you have any water? She had no idea what to do with something like this. They didn't have any water. Help me carry her back then, she demanded. Carefully, now! Hannah, with a hand on her red cheek, looked ready to strike back, and Bree didn't care. Not for the first time, Bree felt like she didn't understand the way people thought. And then, she didn't want to understand how these people thought. Not even from a morbid curiosity. Gwen came to, arms wrapped around Davy's shoulders, when they were halfway back to the towels. They wouldn't tell her she'd passed out, and her pride wouldn't bring her to ask. She seemed back to her usual self, though she was still being carried by Davy by the time they returned to the group, and she was one of the girls protesting going back to the train station soon after. Don't you want to have a bonfire on the beach? Gwen whined. A vote was held, and the boys ended up staying behind while the girls, Hannah and Gwen included, commuted back to the dorm. No word was spoken during the entire train ride. Nothing was reported when the dorm mothers, sensing a new tension, asked about the trip. But that night, while Bree was combing through her room again, she found the violet chip. It was under her pillow no less, in a place where she thought she would have naturally searched that morning.